Have you ever been pushed to the edge by a toxic boss who made your work life a living nightmare? How I turned the tables on a deceitful VP of sales, outsmarted a company's dirty tricks, and got my revenge in the most satisfying way possible, spanning 18 years and counting. Some time ago, I was hired by a CEO I had previously worked with. We were good friends, and when his new company stopped making sales, he specifically lured me to join. The company hadn't made a single sale in 2 years. In the first year, the product was in beta, and it was simply too early to sell. In the second year, they realized that using IT folks to sell the product to top executives was the worst sales model imaginable. Generally, there are exceptions, but these two types of people, techies and salespeople, simply speak different languages. Techies talk in tech jargon, while salespeople talk about benefits and how the product meets the buyer's needs. I, however, am good at translating from technical to human language so that clients understand what and how it will work for them. The job was an hour-and-a-half drive from my home one way, so the CEO said I could work from home as long as I managed the CRM, attended important meetings, and sent daily sales reports. In the first month, I still went to the office every day, spending 3 hours a day commuting. It was important for me to build strong connections with other departments, develop a sales strategy, and earn the trust of department heads. Fully immersed, I was ready to launch the strategy. Then, a new vice president of sales came on board, my boss. She was hired 4 days before I went out to meet clients. She came from the banking sector with extensive experience in sales and marketing of financial products, and I hated her from the first minute. She understood absolutely nothing about technology, and I wasted a ton of time trying to bring her up to speed, time I needed for the strategy. She was hired solely because she had experience attracting investors. Nevertheless, I moved forward, went to the target state, and spent 19 days traveling across it. When I returned, I had 17 signed contracts worth about $2 million. The CEO was thrilled. 6 months passed, I was working from home. Everything was running smoothly, sales were happening, the CEO was pleased, and everything was going great. My boss hooked an investor willing to invest $6 million in the company, and he was coming for a meeting to get acquainted. She asked me to come because the investor insisted on personally meeting someone from the sales team. A second before we entered this critical meeting, she pulled me aside and said we needed to cover up a lie she had already told. Essentially, she had inflated my actual sales figures by double. I immediately said I wouldn't go along with it. She replied that the CEO was aware and had approved it. During the meeting, the investor looked at the presentation data, naturally with my inflated figures, and directly asked, "How much are you actually selling per month?" Meanwhile, my boss was standing behind him, frantically waving her hands, but I didn't care. I told the truth. The investor stared at the document with the other numbers. She was glaring at me from behind him. Dead silence. No one said a word. I asked to see the document, and as if by magic, fate handed me a lifeline. I said, "Oh, it looks like the numbers were just swapped." And that just happened to perfectly match the real data if you switch the first two digits. The investor was satisfied. The conversation continued. Fast forward about a week, I was with the CIO, Chief Information Officer, and out of nowhere, he casually mentioned my big tits. I'm not shy, but his words threw me off. It was so unexpected and stupid. That same evening, I was chatting with my best friend, who's a lawyer, and mentioned it in passing. He said, "You need to tell the CEO, let him handle it. That's the right move." Thinking it was best to follow protocol, I decided to tell my boss first since I reported directly to her. To be fair, I also reported directly to the CIO because my role was a hybrid of sales and technical responsibilities. The next day, I told the CEO about it, emphasizing that I wasn't angry and wasn't demanding harsh measures, just that he talked to the CIO to ensure it wouldn't happen again. He said he understood and would handle it immediately. 2 days later, I asked if he'd spoken to the CIO. He said no, he hadn't had time because of investor meetings. I gently insisted he do it, mentioning that it wasn't my idea but my best friend's, who's a lawyer. He said, any reasonable CEO should be able to resolve such an issue. I told him I wasn't upset. Everything was fine, but the only word he heard was lawyer. The guy flipped out when he heard lawyer. This was someone who had been my good friend. We'd worked together for years at 2 companies. I tried to calm him down, or so I thought, explaining that I hadn't consulted a lawyer. I was just chatting with my best friend, who happens to be a criminal defense attorney, and said I just wanted him to talk to the CIO. He seemed to understand, and we ended the conversation. The next day, I'm working as usual when a lawyer calls me, saying she was hired by the company regarding my harassment lawsuit. I'm in shock and say it's a mistake. I didn't file any lawsuit. I have no claims. She responds, "Sorry, the company thinks otherwise." From that moment, the atmosphere changed drastically. The CEO was furious that I caused all this chaos during investor negotiations. His reaction set the tone, and the company turned against me. My boss decided to make my life a personal hell. She forgot to inform me about important meetings I was supposed to attend, ignored me when I came to the office, forbade me from communicating with the CEO when I was selling a complex tech product worth millions and needed his involvement, especially since I reported directly to him. She canceled my long-approved vacation, did everything possible to make my life worse, and took pleasure in it. At the same time, I started having serious health issues and eventually I needed surgery. It didn't affect my work. I was working from home, which helped a lot. But my boss decided I had to come to the office every day, despite the 3-hour round-trip commute. You might ask, why didn't you just leave and find another job? I couldn't. I needed the health insurance. Finding another job that quickly was unrealistic, and I already had a complex surgery scheduled with 3 surgeons. My doctor gave me a note stating I could work from home, and by law, as long as my work wasn't affected, they couldn't force me to come to the office, especially since my contract explicitly allowed remote work. The day before my surgery, my boss called and said they canceled my health insurance. I hung up and passed out on the floor. I was so drained, I couldn't handle the stress anymore. The next morning, the CEO called me in a panic, begging to talk. My mom brushed him off. That day, I was officially on leave and we were heading to the hospital. Turns out the CEO told the company's lawyer they canceled my insurance, and the lawyer tore him apart saying it was illegal. My insurance was immediately reinstated. While I was in the hospital for 2 weeks, my mom found me a lawyer because it became clear the company was pulling some shady moves behind my back. I still needed the job. Physically and mentally, I wasn't ready to seriously look for a new one. It turned out everything they were doing to me was illegal. Companies aren't allowed to retaliate against employees for reporting violations or harassment. I met with my new lawyer, who said I had a strong case for workplace retaliation and took me under his wing. He said, per protocol, I needed to keep working while he filed a complaint with the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. When it was time to return to work, the company had moved to a new office. This was planned in advance, but my boss refused to tell me where, so I couldn't return. The company's lawyer said they were obligated to give me the new address. Then my boss gave me the wrong directions, so I'd be late on my first day. I walked into the new office seemingly normal, but right in front of the CEO's glass office was a single desk in the middle of the room. That was my new workplace. Now listen up. They banned me from doing sales altogether, banned me from doing anything at all. They hired a bunch of new people and they all treated me like I was a leper. Later, I found out my boss had slandered me to everyone, saying to stay away from me, that I was dangerous, etc., but I couldn't just sit there looking like an idiot. On my lawyer's advice, I started documenting everything they did to me in detail. I recorded every step. My boss started issuing me formal write-ups for the dumbest reasons, like not answering a call on the first ring, asking a question at a general meeting, or requesting access to my personnel file, which, by the way, is legally allowed, though you can't copy it. Every time she issued a write-up, I had to sign it. There was a section for employee comments, and I always wrote the same thing. I disagree with this remark. It infuriated her. She even issued a separate write-up for writing that I disagreed with the previous one. There were times she called me into her office and started yelling, loudly and with full enthusiasm. I didn't take the bait. My standard response was, okay. It drove her crazy. At one point, she was screaming in my face, all red, while I sat with a dreamy expression, imagining a blood vessel bursting in her head and her collapsing from a stroke. My calmness drove her insane. Nevertheless, I was determined to see it through. No matter what they did, I endured it with a stone face and then went back to my desk and wrote everything down in my notebook. She hated my notebook. She clearly knew what I was doing and was right, but it was my personal property, so she couldn't take it. I carried all my things with me, to meetings, to the bathroom, to lunch, because I once caught her rummaging through my desk drawer in my damn bag. It gave me immense pleasure to put a note in my backpack that said, "Go away," and secure it so I'd know if she went through it again. And yes, she did. I held on, though I cried to my lawyer on the phone almost every evening. He had to listen to a lot of my sobbing during that time. Finally, the day came when my lawyer had everything he needed, and I could leave. Moreover, he said I wasn't obligated to give the company 2 weeks' notice. I came back from lunch, opened a document, and wrote one line. I resign effective immediately. I handed it to HR, who was also in on all these setups, and gave it to him. He looked shocked, stood up from his chair, staring at the paper. I smiled sweetly, said, "Bye-bye," and left. I drove home feeling absolutely amazing. A month later, my lawyer and I went to the EEOC office with the CEO, my boss, and their lawyer. The EEOC was reviewing my complaint. In our state, you can't just sue a company for harassment or retaliation. The EEOC first reviews the complaint and, if they find grounds, issues a document called a right to sue. My lawyer laid everything out logically and concisely, presenting all the evidence. His entire speech took 40 minutes. Then they presented their version, complaints about my poor performance, and their evidence, the pile of write-ups from my boss. The EEOC asked about the timeline. Were the write-ups issued before or after I filed my complaint? With a smug smile, my boss said they were all before, as shown by the dates on the documents. The EEOC employee looked at my lawyer looked at me, I looked at my boss, and then calmly pulled out my copies of the documents, handing them to the EEOC employee. I heard my boss growl, "She shouldn't have those copies, they're company property." I showed that the dates on the originals were forged. She'd made copies with blank dates and filled them in later. You see, every time she issued me a write-up, I had to personally deliver it to the CEO for the archive. On the way, I stopped at the copier and made copies. She didn't know that. The room fell into dead silence. The EEOC employee studied the copies, placed them on the table, and was silent for a long time. Then she spoke, and I still remember her words verbatim. "I've seen a lot of injustice and illegal actions, both from employees and employers, including forged documents. But I've never seen anyone be so foolish as to bring documents that are so easily debunked. Moreover, an employee has every right to keep copies of write-ups, and the accusations themselves are a laughable attempt to fabricate a case." She said I had excellent chances of filing a lawsuit and winning it. She suggested their sidestep into the next room and decide on an amount they were willing to pay me. Otherwise, the case would go to court. They left, and you could hear their lawyer tearing them apart. I caught phrases like, "You lied to me, lied to the EEOC, provided forged documents, violated a ton of laws, prepare an amount large enough to keep this out of court. You'll lose." They came back with an offer of $50,000. We agreed. My lawyer and I left the building and did a victory dance in the parking lot. I looked up at the EEOC window and saw my boss. She looked broken and was crying. She had just been fired. That was just my initial revenge. I'm not a vengeful person. I can get angry and let it go. But with my boss, it was different. I held onto that anger and swore I'd get my revenge one day. I kept tabs on her and found out that after being fired, she started a marketing company in the financial sector. Then I waited a year to satisfyingly get my revenge. For the last 18 years, I've been doing one delightful, soul-soothing thing. Every year, I go to her company's website and collect all the employees' work emails and phone numbers. Then I sign them up to get more information from all sorts of online schools, insurance companies, and other aggressive services that hold onto your data longer than a persistent curse and try to sell you everything. The last couple of years, I've used an email bombing service that takes an address and instantly signs it up for thousands of learn more forms and other junk from marketing platforms. I tested it on a disposable email, and yes, it turns your inbox into absolute chaos. You get thousands of emails in seconds, and they never stop. You literally have to delete the account. It's unusable. Every year when I go back to the site for contacts, I see all the emails have been updated to new ones. Last year, my cousin got a job in the same building as my boss's company. I pulled her into my plan, and she deliberately befriended the receptionist at my boss's company. After I ran the same stunt again, my cousin went to lunch with her. The receptionist was in a terrible mood and said the company was in chaos again because the IT department had to change all the corporate emails again. It keeps happening, and no one can figure out why. She also said my boss had to change her personal phone number 3 times because she kept getting bombarded with texts and calls every time I signed her number up for all the internet's junk. Sometimes she even posted it right on the website. The best part was learning she lost a major client who thought the company had too many internal problems. That thought warms me at night, and I sleep very, very well. Edited. Forgot one detail. In the comments, someone mentioned it'd be a great twist if the investor bailed, and it hit me. He did. After I left, they couldn't replicate the sales volume I brought in, and the investor got nervous. The company survived, without my boss and the CEO, but they struggled for a long time because of that fiasco. Mother started, daughter finished.